Steve felt stuck. For years, he had dedicated himself to his craft. He had gone through meticulously and educated himself on all the technical sides of what he needed to know. He had done the early mornings. He had done the late nights. He had taken internships. He had read books. He had listened to podcasts. He had kept the advice front and center that we often hear, that if you just keep your head down and you do the work, everything will end up okay. Yet every night when Steve went to bed, he tossed and he turned and he felt anxiety. He felt a tightness in his chest. He loved what he did, but he still felt stuck. He loved helping the people that he did every day at work, but he still felt like he had more to give. He knew that he was in his job for the right reasons, yet it still felt like something wasn't quite right and he couldn't get over the hump in the next stage of his career. He floated his name out there for jobs. He tried journaling. He tried doing some social media posts, but nothing really gained traction. Now, eventually, people like Steve start to feel worn out and burnout. How do I know? Because I've been there. I've felt frustrated that there were pretenders and charlatans that seemed to win. And no matter what I did, and no matter how I tried to do it in just a humble way, I couldn't seem to figure out what my true competitive advantage was. I couldn't seem to figure out how to make my work stand out without selling out. And I struggled sometimes to get track of really what was my best idea to begin with. And worse yet, these were things that I didn't always want to talk to my friends about because I didn't want them to perceive that I wasn't grateful in my job or that I was looking for something more. At the end of the day, I just knew that I went to bed exhausted, feeling like Steve, feeling like I had more to give and I didn't know what to do. Well, guys, if this in any way, shape, or form describes you, and describing you meaning you do your best to make an impact by being ethical, you try to stay true to your values, and you try to prioritize continual improvement, yet you still feel like you're just struggling, we are creating a workshop and we are hosting it soon. And guess what? Best of all, it is free. Specifically, we're going to be doing it on Tuesday, July 27th, 2021. And if you go to artofcoaching.com/clarity right now, again, that's artofcoaching.com/clarity, you will be able to attend this workshop. Now, I've heard the excuses. Well, what time zone is this? What if I miss it? Guys, don't worry about all that. Just trust that we have you covered. Go to artofcoaching.com/clarity. And in this 1 hour free workshop, we are going to teach you how to better define your niche and market yourself no matter what you're doing, whether it's a small project, whether you're thinking about writing a book or creating a speaking career, or you want to do a podcast or what have you. We want to help you make it so the value you provide to others is unmistakable. We want to help you learn how you can speak to your brand or your service or what you're doing without coming off as disingenuous and salesy. We're also going to go through a 4-part framework that helps you figure out really what your best idea is or what you should run with, where you should start. And we're also going to teach you key communication tactics that help you engage with your intended audience. Remember, your work is not meant for everybody. Everybody should not be your audience. You need to find your people. You need to find the people that understand without a doubt, unequivocally, where your value is and how you can help people, right? And then we're going to help you with strategies for growing visibility. We don't need you to be a social media maven. You don't need to follow all these hacks and all the noise and everything like that. So let us help you decrease some of this anxiety. Let us help you overcome the most common excuses that keep most coaches, leaders, entrepreneurs stuck and struggling. And most importantly, let us help you learn how to create something that is values driven, ethically based, but also can give you guys more freedom in your life to do the things that you feel allow you to make an impact in others. So I could go on and on, guys, and I'm passionate about it, so I tend to rant, but please trust us. Check this thing out, artofcoaching.com/clarity. And for those of you that make the webinar and stay till the very end, we have another bonus for you, something that's going to save you so much time, so much money, and so much frustration that I wish I had things like this, because I know when I started my ventures, whether it was conscious coaching or our online courses, I wasted tens of thousands of dollars and even more than that in terms of hours chasing advice that just wasn't really rooted in the right kind of direction. I didn't have a mentor. Nobody helped me. So let us help you. One last time, I'll say it till you're annoyed, artofcoaching.com/clarity. Welcome to the Art of Coaching podcast, a show aimed at getting to the core of what it takes to change attitudes, behaviors, and outcomes in the weight room, boardroom, classroom, and everywhere in between. I'm your host, Brett Bartholomew. I'm a performance coach, keynote speaker, and the author of the book, Conscious Coaching. But most importantly, I'm a lifelong student interested in all aspects of human behavior and communication. I want to thank you for joining me, and now let's dive into today's episode. One thing we talk a lot about on this show is the importance of building buy-in, and for good reason. When people are more bought in, they have greater commitment, and with greater commitment, they have greater effort, and with greater effort and focus, you get better results. But buy-in isn't very easy to build, especially when you're working with individuals in another country or you're coming in fresh to a new organization, and it doesn't matter how much you want to help. Because even if you have the best intentions and you phrase your messaging nearly perfectly, the perception of others plays a role. Not everybody's going to get bought in at the same time. Not everybody's going to be bought in general. And part of the art of coaching and the art of communication, and thus the art of management or leadership, is knowing how to manage this ebb and flow of other people's perceptions, egos, and attitudes, and your knowledge and expertise, and find a way to really make them coalesce so that what you're trying to do doesn't come off as intimidating or overpowering. And it's this ease of transition into a relationship that is dyadic and mutually beneficial. And that's what makes today's guest so intriguing. Joseph Coyne has over 15 years experience working with elite, professional, and Olympic athletes. And most recently was the performance director for UFC Performance Institute in Shanghai. That's right, despite not being born in China, he had to come into a foreign country and find a way to blend his knowledge and expertise in a non-egotistical way while seeking to understand in terms of a radically different culture. Now, prior to joining the UFC in 2019, he personally supported athletes that broke 6 world records and collected 15 gold medals at the Olympics and various world championships. He's also a speaker. He's lectured at a number of international sports science and strength and conditioning conferences, is a PhD scholar at Edith Cowan University, and is a reviewer for a number of different academic journals. So if you're somebody that feels like you have to context switch a lot, maybe between being a parent, a spouse, a manager, a director, a coach, or a leader, this is going to be right up your alley. As always, we jump right into the conversation, and Joseph had a very tight window, so we hit it hard and we hit it fast. But I hope you enjoy this episode because there's going to be a lot of tactical takeaways and there's going to be a lot of nuggets that you're going to want to come back and revisit. So make sure to download the reflection sheets by going to artofcoaching.com/reflections. That's artofcoaching.com/reflections to get the notes pages you need to get every episode and make it applicable as possible. Without further ado, Joseph Coyne. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Art of Coaching podcast. I am here with Joseph Coyne. Joseph, thanks for sitting down with me today.
No problem, brother. No problem at all.
Hey, it's a special day for you, right? We know that your dissertation or your thesis, and I know in different parts of the world, we talk to these differently and give them different nomenclature, it got approved or is in the process of getting approved. So soon you're going to be Dr. Joseph Coyne. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I just got an email this morning. The examiners of my thesis said, yes, it's passed with some minor amendments. So I just got to fix up these minor amendments, shoot it back to the university, and then hopefully it's you can call me doctor for about a month until I get sick of it, and we can rock and roll with Joseph from there.
And listen, man, you know, we always give the bio at the beginning, but you're very humble, right? You have over 15 years experience working with elite, and there's a lot of people that say they work with elite athletes, but I mean, Olympic caliber athletes and people that have won multiple world records. And not only that, like these are some of the most explosive athletes on the planet. And you're doing this in a country that is not your country of origin. So within that, I hope our listeners, because we're going to dive into this, appreciate the fact of how hard it is, one, to manage high-level athletes and performers, especially in the world's biggest stage. Two, to do it in a country that you weren't born in, but you don't speak the native language, or at least you didn't fluently when you start. Can you give a little bit more background about that and how you came to be where you are before we dive into some more subjects around this?
Yeah, sure. So look, basically just on the whole, this was in China, right? And I was lucky enough to work with, I had two jobs in China. One was as performance manager for Exos, and I think it was a similar time as when you were involved with that company, Brett. And I was over in China. This position, I mean, you couldn't help but work with gold medalists. That's all they gave you. So it was kind of like by default, I got to work with these guys. But I learned a heck of a lot. And this was predominantly with weightlifting. After that contract finished, I moved over to the Chinese Track and Field Federation as a physical preparation coach and assistant coach there. And this was with the sprinters and the long jumpers. So it's basically this sort of 3-year period I had in China was all around sort of strength, power, speed, jumping sports. And I learned a tremendous amount. But yeah, in regards to not knowing the language, I went over there and didn't have a lick of Mandarin. One thing that I think really helped me was my enthusiasm for learning another language. It's like a life goal of mine to get really fluent in another language. I'm still not fluent in Mandarin, but I can coach in Mandarin without a translator pretty well now. And yeah, look, I think that's a massive part of it. In terms of the difficulties, it's like anything. It's never perfect, right? But if you keep getting better and better and make what you're doing better and better, there'll be progress. So don't expect perfection. Just keep it rolling in the right direction.
Yeah, I think only you would try to say that you just kind of fell into this, and I appreciate the humility, right? And even if we did, I think a lot of listeners that tune into the podcast, they may have found themselves into situations at some point that, maybe, hey, all right, I'm in this situation before I'm really ready for it. Or maybe I got a promotion a little bit earlier in my career than I anticipated. There's always this big thing that you kind of fall into, and it kind of contributes to imposter phenomenon a little bit, right? Because on one end, you certainly don't want to take credit for the individuals that you're working with, because these are some of the most gifted individuals in the world. On the other end, you do have to give yourself credit, because it is very easy. Just like I imagine that if somebody has a 16-year-old out there and they were to gift them a sports car with a terrifically powered engine, right? That's generally pretty easy to wreck compared to more of a, let's say a Prius or a safer, more conservative vehicle. So on the other end, give yourself a little bit of credit, right? Like you could screw these guys and gals up. And just for a lay audience, anybody that's not in the performance realm, can you tell them exactly what sports you worked with? Because I know you said track and field and some jumpers, but specifically for people that don't do this every day, can you give more insight there?
Yeah, so the first position was like you're at an institute, like a sports institute. The main sport I worked with for 18 months was weightlifting. So these are guys and girls. China is a world power at weightlifting. In my time there, like I'll give an example of one competition. I mainly worked with the women's team, but at the 2015 World Champs in Houston, Texas, the worst result for any one of the females that got sent there was a silver medal in the world across the snatch, the clean and jerk, and the combined total. So that is like they are just in the women's part of weightlifting, they just clean house. It's just utter dominance. And then that was my predominant role with them, but I also worked with sports like swimming, diving, and a few others that are really important sports for China in that role. And then I moved over to track and field, and this was all about working with sprinters, 100-meter sprinters, 4x100 relay team, but predominantly the long jumpers and the long jump squad they had there. Also did a little bit of work with high jump, but so that was more sort of at one realm of the strength and power sort of scope, and then moving right down to the other end of the spectrum. And look, the track and field in China is not as successful as weightlifting, so it was not a step down by any means, but it was much more challenging to get results on the world stage compared to the previous position. That's for sure.
Yeah, and thanks for the specificity. So knowing a little bit about this, right? I would have to imagine, and I want you to correct me on this, a day in the life. And again, just to orient our listeners, whether they're in the performance realm or not, what this is like. You're in another country. You're away from your wife and your two children, which I believe they're the children's name Harlan and Hale. Is that correct pronunciation?
That's it.
Cool. And what is Hale, around 2 years old now?
Just turned two.
Just turned two. Okay, great. Yep. So, and I'd have to imagine just from my time working with athletes, but, I'd never full time train them in another country, but given the specialization of the Chinese culture, and this is your typical warm up, which might take, in this case, 45 minutes to an hour. And I know that sounds like a long time for anybody listening that's not a strength coach to warm up, and then an hour of track work and then an hour of weight room work, or what would this look like daily in terms of managing the life and the training schedule of that Olympic athlete?
Sure. So this specific period, I'm thinking from sort of mid 2016 or early 2016 to 2017, a day in the life would have been you wake up, breakfast, training begins at 9. The warm-ups will generally last, like you said, 45 minutes to an hour. That's sometimes how long you need to warm up before you can really run fast. Then it might be a technical session of sprinting and jumping work. This might last another 2 hours. So it might be a 3-hour session. Then you would go and have lunch. Then you'd have a nap. In China, it's really common to have a sort of midday nap, which is awesome. I loved it. That one aspect of the culture I really got and embraced to the fullest. And then after that, you come back to training around 2:30 or 3. Again, similar type warm up. There might be this session, just typically speaking, might be half and half. So half technical work and half weight work. Again, it might be around 30 to 45 minutes warm up, and then maybe 2 hours to 2.5 hours of technical work and weight room work. And then you'd finish up by going to the pool and having another half hour of recovery in the pool. So some days were literally 7 hours of training, and dispersed by your lunch and your nap. And other days might have been a bit shorter, but on average, it would have been about sort of 5.5 to 7 hours training per day on our double days.
And what I appreciate about you going in depth there is we had a listener one time that reached out, Joseph, that was in finance, and they had asked a really good question. And this was a conversation I had actually had with my father at one point in time, who was in finance, that, how is your industry, and he was talking about the performance industry, different with respect to finance, aside from the obvious. And I said, well, it's interesting because I actually see them more in common. And this alludes to what you were talking about. In training, you went through that's a massively organized, ritualized schedule, right? And so you're always trying to organize everything to maximize an adaptation. We need this person to get faster. We need this person to get more powerful. Those two go hand in hand to a degree, and we need to minimize the risk of injury. And so what I tried to tell this individual was, hey, it's not that different in finance when you want to maximize the returns of your investment and minimize losses. But there's all these other variables, and relatively some of them might seem simple to understand, but also many of them are unpredictable. And collectively, these can be referred to as internal and external load, which I know is another huge specialty of yours. One, do you see that congruency between, the financial example and you having to manage these high asset, high class athletes? And then two, can you elaborate a little bit on some of these variables for, again, any lay audience that's listening that contribute to that, whether it is internal or external load?
Yeah, sure. No, there's so many parallels with the sort of finance world. Like I actually borrowed a lot from sort of quantitative analysis and share trading for my PhD in analyzing training load, which is quite interesting. Things like all the different moving averages they use. There's a lot of parallels with what we do in sports science. Like one of the, just what you said, return on investment. That's a really big thing. So just like efficiency, you do as little as possible to get as much as possible with what you're doing. So if you can do 2 sets and that will give the same results as 5 sets, why would you be doing 5 sets? That would be like spending $100 when you can only spend $40 to get the same return on your money. So those absolute return, I'll say, absolute return, not percentage return. I'll just clarify that.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah. But that's a massive concept. That's always stuck in my mind. And there's so many sort of variables there around, say, and this is where it does kind of distinguish itself, is that you can have a set amount of work. Say it's you're running 5K as a really simple example. You run 5K on one day, it's 20 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but 20 degrees Celsius, there's no wind. It's really pleasant. On another day, you can run a 5K, exact same distance, so exact same external load, but now it's windy. It might be 30 degrees Celsius this time. And you've just had an argument with the coach or wife beforehand, and the one 5K versus the other, they're going to have completely different responses in the body based on those external factors. And the internal load, so how your body responds to that training, is going to be different. You might be running it slower, you might be running it at the same speed, but working much harder to maintain that speed. So all these things, it's a really simple example, but all these things go into what you might have to be thinking about when you have a set session designed for an athlete, and they might come in, and you've got to start thinking on your feet and reading their body language, their mannerisms, how much they're talking, how they're conversing with other athletes, how they're looking at the start of the session through the warm-up. All these things might be factors that you might have to be accounting for as you go through the process of training this individual or individuals throughout this sort of 2-hour block or 2.5-hour block.
Yeah, and I appreciate you going through that. The reason I touch on it is we think of internal and external load as factors that, obviously impact human performance. But I think sometimes people forget that this applies to communication, management, leadership, and what have you as well, right? There can be the breakup with the girlfriend, as you alluded to, or boyfriend. There can be factors related to the training. Maybe the training session was too strenuous. And I've always thought of this, although maybe I'm crazy, we have our own forms of internal and external load in leadership, right? Like, what are role conflicts at work? What is the workload you actually want to have? Some people need to be busy, right? They're very type A and neurotic, and they want to have a lot of work to do. Other people might not want as much administrative work. What if you have an issue with somebody at work? What if somebody doesn't take you seriously? What if there's a communication issue? I know I'm kind of throwing you to the wolves here, but given that your dissertation is on internal and external load from a training standpoint, could you maybe talk to, and now we're going to go away from a lay audience and to maybe a young performance coach, somebody who feels like, I know I need to grow in the art of coaching and communication, but I feel like I need more understanding of training first. Can you maybe explain where they might be missing the boat of, hey, careful there, because if you don't understand communication, you're going to be ignorant to various forms of internal and external load in that spot of it too. If that doesn't make sense, let me know and I'll try to clarify the question.
No, yeah, I think you alluded to this prior, but there is, and this isn't saying you don't have to be or don't want to be eventually a master of your craft.
No.
In terms of the technical aspects of it and whatever discipline or sub-discipline you go down. But you definitely have to know, if you want to coach somebody or communicate with somebody, you have to know how to influence that person. And I was, at least with athletes, I can say I've been very lucky to have done. I consider it lucky. At the time, I just did it because I got actually a $10,000 scholarship to do a diploma of teaching, like a postgrad diploma of teaching. I didn't really know what I wanted to do after I finished my PE degree, which you couldn't actually teach with. And so the government at the time, there was a shortage of male teachers, and I was like, right, sign me up for this. I'll stay another year at university. It's good times here. And I did a teaching diploma. And look, it's helped me so much in terms of understanding the pedagogy and transfer of knowledge from oneself to the people you're trying to impart that knowledge to. Now, whether it's knowledge or whether that's just trying to influence other people in certain ways, not like in a negative fashion, but positively influence other people. And so you have to have a combination of these things. If you have the best technical skills but don't understand pedagogy or technical knowledge but don't understand pedagogy or communication, it's very unlikely those technical skills will be transferred to the athlete or the other people you're working with. That knowledge probably won't get passed on to those people. So you have to understand how these things work, and this is just another skill. People should consider another technical skill that they should master, as well as the actual nuts and bolts of their industry.
Yeah. And I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, where this narrative comes from, where people think there's got to be a dichotomy or a choice. I think about a business owner, and one of my neighbors owns his own business, and this idea that people think that there has to be one before the other. This person has to understand the hard aspects of their trade. In this case, he does computer programming and code and what have you, but he also has to understand the interpersonal side, customer service. We think of somebody that, is a CEO of a massive company. They need to know the hard elements of that job, but they also need to be able to speak to many different things. I'm curious as to why, and I'm sure it exists in other fields, but we're going to focus on sports performance right now. Why there seems to be this hierarchical or this process, I have to learn this before that, especially when coaching is such a social-based thing. I mean, think about your experience, Joseph, right? You lived in China, right? And what kind of political realities, and I don't mean like geopolitics, right? I'm not going to ask you to speak on that, but like what kind of political realities or communication-based interpersonal barriers, however you want to phrase it, daily got in the way of some of your programming, or at least in the way that you presented it. So there's two questions there. Where is this narrative coming that there's a dichotomy? And where is the detachment in observation coming from, where people think that they have days at work where they're just going to work on programming and they're never going to have to worry about the actual face-to-face interaction thing? Because it just perplexes me where these thought processes have came from in our field.
Yeah. Look, Brett, to be honest, I don't know where this dichotomy's come from. It's something like I've always considered that you have to develop like yourself, maybe Renaissance man type ideal. If you've got factors that are successful in your industry, you should be developing all those factors simultaneously, or at least doing an analysis of where you're really strong and where you're really weak. Some people might already have or be above average in certain areas, say communication, and this is like. I don't want to throw this out there, but I'm thinking like I started off I did some personal training work when I first started. I can think of guys that didn't really know their craft, but man, they were good communicators, and they were always busy, always bringing food home onto the table. Other people that knew their craft really well, but weren't good communicators, they were struggling to put bread on the table for the family. So that really stuck with me, and I'd say you should be developing yourself and understanding where you're strong, where you're weak, and then basing just like you might do with an elite athlete, and you might say, okay, we might need to work on aspects of the counter movement jump. Their strength levels are already awesome, so let's really focus on this for our next training block. Let's just have a little analysis of what we're good at, what we're bad at personally, and then devote time to improving those facets, because all those facets will be important to what you want to do in whatever industry.
Yeah. So, I mean, getting this idea of, again, looking at asymmetries and something you're incredibly knowledgeable in, and I won't allow you to, use any faux humility here, is power, right? Building power. And I remember you talking about on one podcast in particular that oftentimes we can get too caught up on strength-based numbers and we need to focus more on power. Now, I have a follow-up question to that, but just again, for our audience and a chance for you to really show your expertise, because I enjoy listening to the way you break this down. Talk to me about why, whether we're training athletes or if it's a lay person trying to get faster in a 5K, we should really be more focused on power-based numbers as opposed to just going to a gym and looking what load is on the bar. Now, I know there's obviously interplay between the two, but just give a little bit of a distinction between strength and power and how you view that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So look, all sports, the lens I look through all sports is through a power lens normally. So whether it's running 100K, that's work divided by time. The work is the 100 meters. The time is how fast you run it. So if you run it in 10 seconds versus 12 seconds, 10 seconds obviously is going to have higher power outputs. The same thing with jumping. The displacement would be an indication of the power. And the time you did it in would be an indication of the power. So everything we look at, whether it's a one-off effort compared to, say, a 5K, a marathon could be broken down into terms of power terms. So everything through my mind, just the way I think, I'm like, yeah, let's think about this as power. How are we going to influence that equation, whether it's the force times velocity side of things, how are we going to improve velocity or improve force, or whether it's the work divided by time, how are we going to make more work in the same amount of time, or how are we going to do the same work in less amount of time, or maybe even it might happen that we can do both, increase the work and decrease the time. But how do we influence those factors and then step that back, make our performance model, which is this power model, make our preparation framework for that performance model impact it? So whatever we look for in the performance, how do we step that back and actually influence that so that then we're getting things working upstream and actually improving the performance of the athletes that we're working with.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode with Joseph. I just want to remind you, please, if you're somebody that is impact driven, you're ethics based, and you want to do something that provides more help to other people. You want to help other people get out of their own way. You want to help other people live a better life. You want to help other people by sharing your perspective. Do not miss the webinar we talked about at the beginning of this episode. Go to artofcoaching.com/clarity right now. It's absolutely free. artofcoaching.com/clarity. And if you attend the webinar and stay to the end, we have extra bonuses for you. So again, if you're somebody that's felt stuck, or you feel like you want to help others, but you don't know where to start and you can't get out of your own head, or maybe you just need a little extra push and guidance, artofcoaching.com/clarity. Can't wait to see you there. All the details are on that page.
Whatever we look for in the performance, how do we step that back and actually influence that so that then we're getting things working upstream and actually improving the performance of the athletes that we're working with?
Yeah, I think, when you mention that, we know that power is an expression of force over time, right? And I think I was talking to an athlete about this today who he just has a tremendous bias towards maximum strength training. And I have to remind him, hey, that this is great. You're very strong. But if we don't learn to express this in more of a ballistic manner or a rapid manner, whether that's plyometrics or med ball throws or even just lighter weights with bands and chains, it's really going to have trouble transferring in any way, shape, or form to your performance beyond a point, right? There's this point of not sunk cost fallacy, but point of limited returns, right?
Diminishing returns. Diminishing returns. Let's talk finance again, right?
Well, yeah. and we talk about that, but we talk about, power really being like force over time. And then I think about buy-in, right? Well, that's trust over time. We got to build trust and you don't want to rush it, and you can't rush it because sometimes people aren't going to be coachable, or they're not going to be open until, a life event has happened that makes them want to hear a message or what have you. But I think about you going into another country and you having to build trust with the Chinese Athletics Association, or Joseph, you can use literally any example you want. But when did you come into a situation as a foreign agent, either into a new country or into a new job, period, and then you had to deal with colleagues and coworkers and building trust and buy-in with them, not just the end user, in this case, the athletes? What, in essence, if I'm new and I'm listening to this show and I'm thinking, tomorrow I start a new job, what's the most efficient way to go about building buy-in? And I know that's very general, so have fun with it. What do they need to consider, and what have you learned?
Yeah, look, that's an interesting one. I think it depends on the person and depends on who you are as a person. I come from like a rural background where we're almost, I wouldn't say suspicious of other people, but there's like we keep a pretty closed shop up to a certain point until we get to know somebody. So if anybody comes in and is immediately too friendly with me, that immediately raises my red flags. And that's something that I've been brought up with. Like my dad, for instance, he could have a conversation with somebody and people would walk away and go, oh, that guy's a really nice guy, but I don't really know what he does, or I don't really get much out of him, because he keeps the cards close to his chest. And so maybe that's how I am. I always like going into a situation and making sure that like first and foremost, getting to know the other person first before I'm trying to impart any of my knowledge or you know what I mean, so getting them to understand me. But getting to know them first and foremost would probably be the thing that I would say is the number one factor to getting buy-in from people, and then obviously getting them to trust you, which might be synonymous with buy-in, is a factor that's built up over time. Some people take longer, or there might be more roadblocks to building that trust in, and you just have to work on that over time. Like relationships, whether it's your marriage, whether it's a relationship with an athlete, with your co-workers, they shouldn't be one-night stands that are great for one day and then over the next day, but they should be something that grows and matures over time. So yeah, first and foremost, I'd always say it's taking the time to get to know the person, and then different people have different strategies, and it might be a slow burn approach. Other people might be more open, and that's one thing I've definitely found in settings is some people are definitely more open to new ideas or working with other people. Some people are really stuck in their their thoughts, and it's really hard for them to change the way they think, and being able to recognize that. And maybe it's even like an archetype, just like you have in your book, The Conscious Coaching of Archetype of Athletes. There's archetypes of colleagues as well, and who might be more open to different approaches, who might be less, who might take longer to build trust with, and knowing how far to go forward with versus how far to keep yourself held back and wait for them to come to you. So, the long answer, but I hopefully that answered it to some degree.
Yeah, no, it's very helpful. I found here's the thing when I reflect on it, right? I think that there's no shortage of messaging out there for coaches in performance and otherwise, right? No matter what the field is, that relationships are important, that we need to listen, that we need to take our time. I think what I've learned, especially running our workshops and doing courses as long as we have now, is that it almost doesn't answer the question for people because they still don't know how to do that. It's kind of like saying, hey, how do I build explosive athletes? And you say, well, listen, you have to have, strong underpinning of fitness, their ability to perform a task and general physical preparedness. And then you got to build a foundation of strength. And that strength helps express force in congruence with explosive exercises, whether it's sprinting, what have you. But right, like that wouldn't help certain people because they're like, whoa, okay, well, where do I start and what rep range? And what I've had to do is I've had to slow down, Joseph, and almost remember that or remind myself that people need the same kind of coaching and communication because they may hear you or I say, hey, you need to go in and build trust. And they're like, well, shit, I don't really know how to do that. Hey, you need to go in and ask people questions and seek to understand. Well, they're there that first day. There's a lot of stuff going through their heads. People are looking at them and they're like, what question do I have? So where are you from? And they're like, that's a stupid question. I've just found that it becomes so much trickier when people have to actually apply it. Yeah, we don't get training on it. And I have to ask you, you're very socially astute. We've had many conversations and granted some people are better at this stuff than others, but I'm a firm believer that social skills can be trained. How do you practice? How do you refine? How do you make sure that you're not asking people general, boring, stiff questions and that you're not coming off as overbearing or that you're monitoring your tone and the tempo of your speech right, given a certain environment? How do you look at evaluation of your own use of communication?
Yeah. Look, I guess it's just reflecting on certain situations that you might have had with athletes or with colleagues and asking yourself, what could I have done better in those situations, depending on the outcome? What did I do well? What could I have done better? Where could I have taken this had it been a different situation, but if it did turn out negatively? And then also that reflection, and then also, I guess, asking other people and telling other people that might be third parties and telling them about the situation, your views on them, asking them, hey, what could I have done better in this fashion, in this moment? And I really identified with your comment about slowing down and stepping back in that sort of question. And that's definitely one of the things I've learned over time is to do that. You have to, for me anyway, and maybe I think a bit differently, but I'm a real early adopter of things. I really like always be in forward motion, even if it's not perfect. And I'm just like, let's just keep making this thing better and better and better day by day. Even if it's not perfect, we just keep making it better and better. But for some people, that might be really, really hard for them. And so it's trying to recognize when those situations might be arising and trying to work with them as best as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think you give good insight there, especially I think when you consider your background, right? This is something admittedly I didn't know about you, that you serve as a reviewer for a number of academic journals. You speak, I know that. You have a keen interest in business as well as coaching. So you talked about Renaissance Man. I mean, that's clear in that's part of your DNA. There's a lot of different forms of communication in that, right? Reviewing academic journals is one form of you got to get used to some drudgery there, right? Depending on the journal you're reviewing for, just different levels of assumption of knowledge. Is it okay that this person did or did not cite that? How many citations did they use? Getting really granular. However, sometimes when you're a lecturer, you have 60 minutes to get really complex ideas across, and you have to walk that tightrope being a science-based professional of not oversimplifying so much that you're a popularizer, but also not getting into the weeds too much where you're trying to literally teach somebody everything you know in 60 minutes, which we know, of course, is not going to work. When it comes to that context switching for you, putting the hat on of academic reviews and then going and giving a presentation or having to, just have a conversation with your son, what are some things that you do to kind of allow you to switch that context a little bit more cleanly, right? To put this hat on and make sure you're not speaking to your wife as you would your athlete or your kid like an act. You know what I mean? I think it's something that's taken for granted, but it's harder than most people think if you wear a lot of hats, is it not?
For sure. And I've probably done that. I've probably spoken to my athletes as if they're like I'm reviewing an article, or my wife as if I'm speaking to a academic or something like that. So guaranteed I've done that. But you always got to remember who you're speaking to, and their degree of expertise in this subject matter, and then making it more black and white the less expertise they have. And this is something I picked up, or at least I kind of understood the concept, but it really reinforced it from a guy called Grant Jenkins in Australia. Hey, if you're speaking to a beginner, make it black and white. We know there's so much context around things. The same goes for athletes, but make it black and white. If you're speaking to somebody really advanced, they already know about the grey as well, but it helps them gain trust, I guess, with you if you do provide some of the context. So there's this like continuum of where things need to be black and white, where things need to be grey, with your communication styles to certain people, and trying to understand what that audience is first and foremost before you decide on, hey, look, you need to do this versus, hey, well, we've got these factors at play. We might need to think about this before we do any of them, and this is the sort of pluses and minuses of each approach. So that would be definitely the sort of black and white to grey continuum in the sort of communication is definitely something I think about and think about a lot.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you. I'm glad you did that, because sometimes it can be tricky for our listeners when we talk about something conceptually and we don't give an example. So thanks for doing that with the black and white. Just to give another example to strengthen it, I remember, today again when training, an athlete was doing a heavy squatting session, and they're at a point in their life, in their career where, they're continuing to, how do I phrase this? Maybe going a little overboard with flexibility, right? They feel like, I've just been in the NFL so long. I need to do more yoga. I need to do more of this. And we won't get into the whole concept of why they perceive that and how there's yoga elements in their warm up and what have you. This is just what it is, right? So kept wanting to do intensive stretching for the quad and hip flexor in between. And it's always important, right, that if somebody's doing movement, we can do little things here to kind of enhance the quality of that. But this was overboard, and I had to explain to him, and I'll call him Dave for the sake of the conversation. I said, Dave, listen, like that's all well and good, but simply put, you stretch too much, and your next set you're gonna have a lot of trouble, right? Being too loose is just as bad as being too tight in the context of this. And I just kept it simple right there, right? And I think me in the past, I'd wait for their response. If they didn't buy in or listen, I'd kind of talk to them about, muscle spindles and this and that. And then you'd lose them and you're like, damn it, I tried doing well by educating them. And then I just came off like a jackass. Now it's just, you try to be as simple as possible, and not because people are dumb and not because they can't get it, but you need to have a starting point. So I always tell people, start with something very simple, or in your case, like what you said, just keep it black and white, help them understand that we could go this way, we could go that way, what have you, but then kind of blend in the gray, And so the next day I talked to him, and I just remember saying, hey, if you feel tight, talk to me, especially when I ask you how you feeling today. That's the time to tell me. And we can spend some more time on the front end where it's not going to put you in such a compromised situation as it would mid-session if you're overstretching something. Is the example I gave me hearing you correctly? Did I grossly misinterpret it? I'm just trying to be as tactical as possible for our audience.
No, that would be an application. There would definitely be an application of it for sure. And whether it's starting off with the black and white and then progressing to the grey if you feel it's needed in a certain situation with an individual, or even trying to assess that individual beforehand and gauge, okay, this guy, he might be an experienced athlete, but he might not have much technical knowledge about the physiology or muscle architecture or things like that. You're not going to speak to him in grey. You're going to be, hey, mate, don't stretch too much. You won't be able to produce enough power in your next set.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah.
Period. Versus somebody who might be a PhD in muscle physiology, you might have to go into a bit of grey with a bit of like pluses and minuses and say, well, look, you could do that. You could be stretching between sets. Your power might be down a little bit in the next set or might be decreased in the next set, but these are the sort of other things we might consider. What do you think, or where do we need to go with this? Because one thing I definitely think is if you're speaking too much grade to people that might not have a technical knowledge just entering into the field or not really overly concerned with the mechanisms behind why things work, is you'll just come off sounding like you don't really know what to do. Like there'll be all this thing, well, we could do this, but in these factors, and then basically blah, blah, and they'll just come away, that guy didn't really know what he's talking about. Couldn't give me an answer.
Yeah, without a doubt. And there's always constraints, right? That's another tie-in that I appreciate about performance when we're looking at actual agility and decision making and leadership and the same. And one constraint we have in this podcast is time. And so I'm going to ask you one more question because then I know you have to go. And it's unfortunate because I have probably like 15 more questions I want to riddle you with, but we'll have to do a part 2. And
for sure, love it.
The way I'm going to form this question is going to be a little bit of a playful jab, right? So it's me kind of asking, I'm role playing here, but you have a background. Let me think how to phrase this. Yeah, you no doubt have a performance-based background. Yeah, you know a good bit about leadership models and differences between business and high-performance teams. What would you say to somebody that looked at you and said, hey, you've by and large worked in a weight room and or a track or whatever setting training athletes, and maybe they hear you talking about business and leadership models and they say, what the hell do you know about that stuff? And this is somebody from outside the field. What would you say in essence to somebody that thinks because we don't work in the traditional corporate environment daily, that coaches like yourself or those like you or what have you don't know a thing about leadership models and a bigger picture? Do you think that's valid, or what have you learned in that space?
Yeah, look, I guess in my last position, I devoted a lot of time to sort of learning about leadership models, like the sort of theory behind a lot of them, whether it was things like transformational leadership, things like that. And it is just because you work in a certain industry per se doesn't mean you don't know these things. So, for instance, you might say, okay, this guy is a CEO of a manufacturing company, but he doesn't know about leadership in an automobile company. So it's the same thing. It's just transfer of industry, and leadership of people, just like pedagogy, is the same. Like I believe I can coach any sport, even if I don't have the technical knowledge for that sport, but I know how to set things up so people learn things with what I want to deliver. And once I understand more and more of the technical knowledge, I'll become a better coach in that sport. Same thing with leadership. It can be, I would say my knowledge of it is that leadership might be very specific to the context that person is put in. So there might be, and correct me if I'm wrong on the theory of this, but there might be people that are really good leaders in one situation, but not in the other. But there are some sort of common traits across these people that should transfer through different situations. So although there is this sort of like specific context of where you might be good at as a leader, I would also say saying that just because you worked in a weight room or on a track, and so you can't be a leader in another environment, is just like saying, hey, you're a leader in, like I said, the manufacturing industry, and you won't be a good leader in the automobile industry. It's the same. It's the same idea, same scope. They're just different industries, but the skills of leadership, communication, hopefully remain pretty constant across both.
Yeah, it's something that I really hope that more coaches take to heart, because I still think there's just way too many people in the performance industry who get into this and then think to be a coach means you got to die on the floor. And I really think it does our industry a disservice. And not saying that there shouldn't be people that just want to coach and that's all they want to do is stay on that floor. But I think not understanding the definition of the term coaching expands beyond that, right? Coaching was a term that existed in the lexicon way before sport and certainly way before performance. And that's why we're big on, the art of coaching is the art of dealing with people and getting things done through people. And, you're somebody that I greatly admire and respect at how you do that, especially the fact that you've done this across the world in many different contexts. Before we let you go, want to just invite you anytime you want. And of course, once the world opens up officially, we'd love to have you as our guest on the house to one of our apprenticeships, because no doubt you'd have a tremendous amount to teach us. We do a lot of role playing. It's a lot of fun. I think your personality is well suited for it, because some cower of like, oh, I don't want to look stupid, where, we know that looking stupid is where growth occurs a lot of times. 100%. So I can't thank you enough. Where can our audience go to support you, read your work, anywhere that they can go to interact with you? We want to honor that. So how can we best support you?
Sure. Look, I guess, I'm on socials, Instagram and Twitter at Joseph Coyne, which is my last name is spelled Coyne for the people that might be unfamiliar with it. It's an Irish last name. I guess that would be the best place to contact me in terms of my work. There's a website. I'm actually moving back to Australia, coynesportsinjuryclinic.com.au. People can check that out if they're interested. And you're always welcome to shoot me a email through that website, and I'll get back to you if you have any questions or you want to touch base. In terms of my research, I'm on ResearchGate is a website. If you're interested in that, I don't know too many people that might be, except for the training load nerds. But if you're interested in that, that's ResearchGate. You can search my name, that'll pop up, and there's a few things up there as well. So more than welcome to check it out. And if there are any questions, please get in contact. I'd love to chat more. Yeah. Well, and thank you so much for the offer to come along to the apprenticeship too, Brett. As soon as it does open up, I'd love to be on one of those. Yeah, well, I'm just still bitter. We had 5 scheduled in Australia before COVID, and then we had to, house them for now. And I hope the rumors are not true that Australia decides to hold off reopening until mid-2022. I'll have way too many withdrawals, but that's what I had heard. Any news on that front before we let you go? Yeah, so I have friends that work in the Australian government. They're saying that international travel probably won't be back to normal until 2024. What? For Australians. Yeah, come out, crazy, like, right? You won't reopen the border until 2020? No, maybe like pre-COVID travel won't occur until 2024. Listen, so, we'll talk off the air. Maybe I can, grease the palms a little bit. You can let us in a little early. Until next time, and I can't wait to have another conversation with you. Everybody, thank you for dropping in on me and Mr. Coyne here. This has been Brett Bartholomew and the Art of Coaching podcast. We will see you next time.